right, team. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started here. Seems like most of you I know, but for those of you who don't, my name is Lee Scott. I am with Unleashing Leaders, a little small band of change agents trying to change the world a few thousand leaders at a time. And many of you guys are in here rocking the house with us, so that is awesome to have you here today. So hopefully you'll continue to be friends with me after I brag about some of the successes we've had with some of our clients. For those of you who I'm not bragging about today, I'm not knocking you, not saying you're not loved, you're not special. It's just this is a particularly great case study that I think more folks on the state should know about. And I think it's an excellent time in the state to be looking at business process innovation without the technology focus. I mean, so much of what we're talking about the future is technology driven. I'm not saying that technology is a bad thing, but there's tons of opportunity. There's gold in them there hills, as we say, about working faster, better, and then cheaper, just in terms of how we provide our services to our customers. And that's what everybody in this room got into government for, was to be a public servant. And oftentimes the processes are working against us from being able to fulfill that mission. And so it's about realigning our processes to allow us to do what we're passionate about and why we show up to work every day. So why should you care? Well, if your team delivers a valuable service to California, if you struggle at times to meet your service levels, if you struggle with limited or perhaps shrinking resources, if you rely more on heroic processes or efforts rather than sustainable processes, and if you feel maybe you're like, no, I'm all good. Really, it's good, but I feel like there's some neat ideas that I have, but if I just had some time to implement them, that would be great too. So if any of those apply to you, stick around. If not, there's other sessions that will probably be more valuable to you. What I'd like to do is get a sense of kind of how connected you are to catching the wave of innovation in California. And that's the catchphrase of the project team that I'm highlighting here today, which is from the Employment Development Department, specifically within the Unemployment Insurance Branch. So I've got a little activity to kick us off here, because you know me, I can't do anything without having an activity to start us. So we're going to start on the left side of the room here. I'm going to see if we can catch the wave. So we're literally going to do a wave like at a football game, right? So on that side, I need you to stand up and do a giant big wave, and then we're going to roll from my left to your right. All right, so Greg, start us off and get a big wave going. All right, so oh, look at that. That was remarkably good for our first try. I was kind of worried I might not start with the early adopters and mess it all up, but I think I landed okay there. So let's see if this side can do any better. All right, so starting from the right, here we go. Catch the wave. All right, very good, very good. So all right, so we've all caught the wave. Surf's up. And if you haven't yet met me, my style is, grab onto your chair. This is going to be a rocket ship ride. This session is intended to be how-to. This is a case study straight from our playbook. We are giving this away because we believe everybody has the opportunity to replicate the success that EDD is really pioneering, leading the way with. And really, to their credit, a lot of folks are talking about process engineering and innovation and Lean Six Sigma, but EDD took the bull by the horns on their own initiative, even before it was cool to talk about it at the governor's office. So they're ahead of the curve, and we've got a lot that we can learn from that. I know I have. So why the EDD story? EDD helps job seekers be able to find work, get back to work. So that's a big function of what they do. They also help employers meet their business needs through the tax branch and various other programs that they do to support employers and be able to operate effectively. And they are helping claimants get what they need temporarily so they can get back on track with their lives in that very vulnerable and challenging and daunting time. And that doesn't just help the immediate claimants, but that has also got a huge social and community impact for all of us in California. So their story begins a couple years ago as we were putting together a new strategic plan, and they were looking at, okay, what's this new era of EDD looks like? Now, for those of you who don't know, EDD is kind of counter-cyclical. So when the economy goes bizarre, right, EDD steps in to fill that void. They're a major economic safety net. And then when suddenly the economy recovers, which apparently it fully did during the last election cycle, it's kind of interesting the timing of when the economy was tanking was during an election cycle, and then it's miraculously cured about 6 months before an election cycle. And we all know that actually hasn't happened yet. It is in recovery, but it hasn't cured. Then there's this massive tapering, and so these wild fluctuations and challenges. So we were looking at, okay, well, what's our vision? What's our purpose? And really for EDD, it is to strengthen the economic vitality of Californians and our communities. All right, so that's our vision. That's why we're here. And there were 5 strategic goals that really drive that. And leading the front of that, first and foremost, is having a responsible level of service, knowing that we can't be all things to all people. That's just not going to happen. But we should be responsible in delivering something that is really valuable to them. And the way we do that is by having our operations be sustainable, not relying on heroics, but having something that we can repeat, leveraging the skills of our workforce, and be able to have innovative processes that actually help us meet those needs. And then it all in turn allows us to have better fiscal stewardship. So this is straight from the strategic plan in terms of what they're trying to do as a department. Now that's where we're going, may not be necessarily where we're always at. And so this team was challenged with help us close this gap, help us be better fiscal stewards, help us serve our customers better by delivering a more responsible level of service, or more sustainable level of service through investments in our people and our processes. So what was the challenge at EDD? They were significant cuts in federal funding, and Tad is in the House, so I can't say the specific number, or he would throw a clot, and that would be a bad thing because he's got young kids. But it was larger than over half of the departments in the state of California's entire operating budgets. So imagine your department getting cut in half or completely being eliminated. That's the scale of magnitude that the unemployment insurance program in particular was facing, and yet still having a very high level of service demand from those claimants, and having volatile changes in the workload as they ramped up into the recession, topped out through it during this crisis workload periods, and then now having workload continue to be high, but suddenly the workforce is needing to drop off, and trying to time this very complex equation at scale. Certainly major technology changes in progress. We heard from the SDI Online project was showcased here today. The UI modernization project is also coming right down the pipeline. And then of course, like everybody else, complex federal, state, and local, and tons of case law from all the appeals that we have, which gets more and more leaning towards the claimants, not necessarily the taxpayers. So what was the strategy? The strategy was a four-pronged approach that integrated several best practices, which in many cases are done done separately, and we found a way to integrate them. And so what we did is we took an agile project management approach in terms of how we manage the work. So we took a 1-year-long project and we sliced it into 12 one-month projects so that we could deliver incremental value very, very quickly. The initial charge outlined, the scope was, okay, do some analysis for 6 months, give us a recommendation, and at the end of that we'll make some decisions. And I said, heck no, I won't have any part of that. We are going to get recommendations out the door within 60 days and every 30 days after. So that's the agile approach. Now, how do you do something in a month? It's like there's way too many complex moving parts. How do you do that? Well, you've got to be very, very, very surgical. So, thinking like the evolution in healthcare used to be if you had issues with your heart, a surgeon went in with a cleaver, right, cracked your chest, did what they needed to do, patched you back up, and if you survived the recovery process from the surgery, maybe your heart would be better in the long run. And that's kind of the equivalent of sometimes the business process reengineering experiences I know I've been a part of. It's like, yeah, this is really going to be good for you, but you're going to have to go through trauma and drama for the next 8 months to heal and recover from it. So we want to do more laparoscopic surgery, where it's inpatient, just get in there, do the minor snips, and get out so the patient can walk home and do its job, which is to serve 3 million Californians. So that's where the theory of constraints come in to target those bottlenecks. We pulled the pages out of the Six Sigma playbook to use it to stand up our leadership structure, to make sure that we had a good decision-making model in place and good collaborative skills. They call them green belts and black belts and champions, and those words are kind of neat. We simplified it a bit like we try to do with everything. And then use their data collection methods so that we could reduce the defects that clogged the bottlenecks. And then lastly, we pulled pages from the Lean playbook to be able to focus on going faster first. You'll see that's a big part of our conversation, is that speed is king, and by going faster first, then you get things to be better, and you ultimately end up being cheaper. Any other order, it ends up just gumming up the works. So we took just the essential elements out of those 4 methodologies, blended them together, threw in an awesome dynamic team, and then said, let's make some magic happen. So speaking about the people, our Agile Business Process Innovation team is really, it's the entire organization, because the rallying cry for EDD is one vision, one team, EDD. Let's not forget we're all here to support each other. So what's that team look like? Well, in the UI program, they're serving 3 million California customers a year. So the scale of this is just massive. There's 2,000 field reps that interact with them directly, but there's also around 100 or so folks in IT and admin that are providing the self-service or supporting the systems that those field reps rely on. We took a very small slice of 6 to 8 core team members. These folks, as was mentioned in the earlier breakout session with them, were dedicated to the project team. And not just dedicated, that means like they cared a lot, but they were actually able to work on the team 100% of their time. Now this created an interesting little ripple effect in some certain situations where the response back was, we can't possibly give up so-and-so because she's the only person in the entire department that knows how to do this. And then I listened and I smiled and said, well, then allow me to do you a big favor right now by saying you need to get somebody else out of the 2,000 people who are here to find out how to do that job today. And I'm going to help you do that by not making that crutch available to you anymore. And so that was a huge thing, and standing up to the sponsors who said, hey, let's make this happen, really their support was key. So they were dedicated for an initial tour of duty for a year, and then we've got staggering start and stops, so we have a sustainable model. The whole idea for this was to increase the internal capability to do this so that a small committed team can do this indefinitely, but they do it by rotating out. So we've already had some people roll off, we've got new folks rolling on, and the new team is now being trained by the existing team. They were supported by 6 to 8 advisors who were key thought leaders and subject matter experts in the department, and their role was to be reviewers and routers. So with their job, their responsibility was to review some of the ideas that the team were coming back up, provide some feedback on it, but also when we were running down something, we're like, well, I can't find the data for this, they would say, go talk to so-and-so, right? You know, they've got something that's really awesome you should see. So they kind of would steer and route the team out to get access to the data. And then our recommendations would be presented to the entire division chiefs team. So there were 6 division chiefs, and all of them were presented, and they all had what's called a consultative vote. And that meant when the recommendation was delivered at the end of each session, they were asked to say, are you in or are you out? No halfways, no I want to think about it, make the call, be decisive right here, right now on the data that you see. And they made that vote, but it wasn't a democracy, all right, because our country's a democracy, but our department's not a democracy. So they had a consultative vote to say where they stood, and then based on that input from their advisors, our queen champion of all, which was Sabrina Reed, who's sitting right up in the front, thank you Sabrina for being here, she would make the call. And it may not be the popular vote, right? But she's the boss, and she's making the call, and she bears the burden, and she's going to make that decision. And so, Sabrina, I just have to say, I told you the other day, you are the #1 leader I have worked with in the state of California in terms of your executive sponsorship. So you have to hear that out loud, and I said it publicly, so I'm on the hook. So you got some. You used to be. You got to catch up, right? She's gonna leave you behind if you're not careful there, Sharon. I'm just saying, no pressure there. Yeah. And then yes, they were helped by some coaches, but our model was very different. The original scope was external entity come in, independent audit and assessment, and deliver your recommendations in a workbook. Again, we said I want nothing to do with that. If you want us to, get somebody else. So we said, but if you're interested, our approach is to develop the innovation ninjas internal to the department. So we'll coach them so they can have this capability forever, and we can go on and help other folks learn how to do this. So speaking of those little ninjas, there they are. I told you I used the good picture. And of course, the same quote that Janine used earlier today, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world, because indeed it's the only thing that ever has. So this small band of brothers and sisters dedicated over the course of a year, 12 sprints, serving 3 million customers and the 2,000 field reps that support them, that's who made everything that I'm sharing here happen. This was not me, I'm just telling their story because there was apparently an open room available, and so they had me fill it today. So what's our Agile approach? So let's get into the playbook stuff now. So for those of you, you're hearing more about Agile in this conference, that's excellent. This was Agile applied to a business process type project, not to a technology project. The principles are exactly the same though. So in our first month, which we call sprints, they're 30-day increments, our first month is called Sprint 0. And that's when we spin up the team. So in traditional project management, that's our initiation and planning stuff that we're doing, right? But it's 30 days of it, not 5 years of planning to launch the project. It's like, right, I've spent the entire project budget at that point. So 1 month, and what it included was our sponsor selecting the key players and then building and training the team. And this was, I think, very important. We had 2 days of training with the team, not back to back, but fairly early on. And the first day was all about teamwork. Nothing about the program, nothing about the analysis techniques, all about how are we going to argue like passionate, crazy people and find a way to get along, because we're going to be in each other's businesses, our cubes are going to be right next to each other, we're going to know each other's scent when we walk by. How do we get this team to work as a well-oiled machine? And so we spent a day doing that so we could identify and respect each other's diverse strengths. Then once we realized we were going to get along okay, then we got into the technical tips with the analysis techniques, which I'm kind of highlighting a little bit here today. Then they jumped right into it. They created the enterprise process map, which I'll show you in a little bit. They looked at the major workflow. There's a million different ways that millions of claims can go through the department. So rather than being overwhelmed by that, we categorized them and said, okay, what are the major work streams? And then created a little Pareto chart that said, okay, from highest frequency to lowest frequency. And then we used that as a project schedule. So like, all right, which of these scenarios are we going to go after in what order? And then from that point forward, every 30 days, we would do a sprint. And the sprint included picking a target scenario. All right, I want to go after this slice of work, and it may only represent 20,000 claims or 200,000 claims, but it was a slice. And then we would say, all right, let's collect some data on that. We do the interviews, we do site visits, we'd pull data from systems so that we could piece it together, maybe on a sample that we could gather from some folks, and then we would develop and deliver our recommendations. So, 30 days, fast and furious, delivering recommendations back to our executive team. So the way we kind of map out is day 1, we'd pick the scenario. Day 3 to 10 or so, we're out there collecting data. Again, pulling from systems, interviewing folks, doing site visits. We cannot underestimate the value of going out and seeing it for yourself. Because you can interview somebody who said, well, this is the way I did it 20 years ago when I was in that. And it's like, yeah, right, it has nothing to do with what that's happening today. So you've got to go and sit outside the cubes and walk along with the field rep so you see the actual challenges, and it will speak to you. It's like music that will tell you what's happening. Then we analyze the cause, and our favorite technique for that, a very difficult and complex technique called 5 Whys. And this was perfected by the Six Sigma in MBA programs and by my 2-year-old. So both of those figured that one out. But basically, you'd look at something and say, why are we doing that? It's like, well, that's good. We've always done it. Well, why are we doing it that way? Well, because of this reason. And we do that 5 times, and we would get to some decision that was made in 1948, which is why we're doing that the way we are today. And that may or may not still be relevant. Sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. So after we've analyzed those root causes, then we develop our recommendations, deliver, and then it was a small surgical improvement, not a massive blow up the boxes, re-engineer the world. There's a time and a place for that, but right now that's not was relevant for this team. And then we would make the call, and then we would implement those that were approved, and those that weren't, we would say thank you for your feedback, and we'll learn from next time. And sometimes we went through all of that, and our recommendation was don't do what we're asking, because the data didn't support it. It was like we thought we had something, but the data doesn't support it. So it was always driven by the data. So the title of this is 6 Steps to Putting the Service Back in Public Service. And so I wanted to highlight those here now. And the next few slides are going to kind of go over what we did in each one of those steps. So this is our 6 steps for process innovation. And so step 1 is map the system. You've got to map the system. Now, this is a game changer in terms of finding that Goldilocks position where you're not doing too much, but also not enough. Many business change efforts fail because the leaders and the change agents, they think they know what the solution is. And really what they probably have a good idea is what a symptom is. And they go hacking at it, and they do their very best. And maybe it addresses the immediate symptoms, but it doesn't address the root. Can't see what's going on inside of it. It's too complicated usually for any one person to be able to understand, because it's about the relationships between the parts, not the parts. You've got to create a map of it so you can drive and navigate this territory. By the same token, we don't need 7,000 pages of process documentation, for crying out loud. So we're going to share with you the 2 simple maps that we use day in and day out that we're able to do on the back of an envelope, take a picture with the cell phone, load it up to SharePoint, and call it good. Right? And that gets us all on the same page in terms of what's really going on behind the scenes. Step 2 is define our goal. That seems intuitive, but again, amazing. It's often assumed what the improvement is about. And the game changer in this, what we found, is not just having a goal, but in what order you should have your goals. And we'll take a closer look at that. Step 3 is identifying the bottleneck. This step in and of itself is a game changer in the sense of you can attack 8,000 things that are wrong in any one of our departments, right? We're in a target-rich environment. There's tons of things that could be faster, better, or cheaper, but only a few of those are the critical constraints that determine the overall performance of the system. And so finding those weak links and targeting your investments there is how you can get the most bang for your buck. And so we came up with what were the 3 key data points that we could gather, and we could pretty much pinpoint that's where your bottleneck is. Touching anything else just didn't have the same impact. And then step 4, right around here, most people, if they get this far, they make the mistake now of then throwing bodies at the bottleneck. Well, if you're the bottleneck, put more people on her team. Or let's throw technology at it. Let's automate it. That'll make it better. And so that does have a return on investment, but it usually doesn't have the best return on investment. So we call step 4 the eat what's on your plate before you ask for more step. And this is the same rule I have with my 2-year-old, and that is this. When you're asking for us to go change the policy, advocate with Congress, fight with DOF over a BCP, before you ask me to go do that, can you truly demonstrate that you've been an amazing steward of the resources you already have within the policy constraints that you're dealing with? And I have always, always, always found that there are opportunities to do that. And I have never, ever, ever, and I mean like Taylor Swift never, found a situation where it was already totally dialed in and they truly were justified in asking for more. So let's eat what we have on our plate before we ask for more. Number 5 is align work to pace with the bottleneck. So this rule is before you ask me to cook more food, we're going to eat leftovers. Right? So just because your plate's cleaned up, that's great. What about your brothers and sisters, right? So if there's leftovers, we're eating that too before we go and start cooking for more food. So what this looks like is when we identify that bottleneck, what we're going to do is we're going to look up and downstream and say, is there anybody working faster than the bottleneck? Because if they are, they're overproducing. And it's not getting to the customer because it's going to slam right in the bottleneck and just sit there and stack up an inventory. So there's no point working faster than the rate of the bottleneck. Now, that freaks out most folks in leadership because like, you're telling me you want my people to go slower? And I said, no, I want you to work the same speed you always have up to this level of production and then stop and go do something else. Right? And that's how we're going to free up the resources to be able to self-fund our innovation efforts. You've got some great cool ideas that you're doing in your area. Simple. Figure out where your bottleneck is. Look at the other steps that aren't bottleneck. Free up some of those resources because it's not going to change the overall end-to-end throughput, and use those resources to self-fund whatever cool innovation ideas that you have so that you don't have to go ask folks for BCPs or other fundings. And then lastly, okay, once you've freed up internally by leveling that out, now we can go after the bottleneck. Now we can throw some process engineering. Now we can throw some policy changes. Now maybe we need to throw some technology at it. But that's the appropriate time and place to do that, not first. So let's look at those each in series. So I mentioned earlier a little bit about mapping the system. You know, our eyes deceive us. Okay, whatever I think I see is only a part of the truth. And so I need to triangulate my eyes with all of my partners and other folks around me, and we need to do so quickly. Now, just like an architect building a house, there's no way you'd grab a bunch of construction workers and electricians and plumbers and say, hey, I got this great vision. Let me kind of tell you a little bit about it. Go! Right? No, we're going to have a blueprint. We're going to have some kind of sketch of what that looks like. Now, the reality, though, is those are very helpful, but all maps are also wrong. There's no map that's ever been created that has all the details and all the information that is the same as real life, right? A lot of that gets washed out. So it's finding that sweet spot in the level of detail that allows to help us build the house or to navigate the roads without getting bogged down in unnecessary details. So we've got 2 maps, and again, I'll show you the products of that here towards the end. Now, because EDD is so big and it's at such a scale, we had to come up with a way of kind of tiering and managing the complexity. So we started with what we called kind of the satellite view, and this was kind of where you could see the contour of the Earth, right? So if think of Google Maps, and you first drop onto Google Maps and you see California, and then we would say, okay, so that's the Enterprise SciPoc, and that's the name of one of our models. I'll define that a bit later. So give me a 1-page thumbnail view of what our program looks like. And we looked around and we looked around and we looked around, and there didn't exist such one. All of them only focused on a piece of it. And so we said, well, how do we fix this if none of us has a shared vision of how we're doing things today? So that was our first step. Then we took one area, and this happened to be first payment promptness, so when you're initially filing and figuring out determination and paying a claim, because that's the first time they've experienced the shock of unemployment. We've got to get them fast. Once they're in it, they know how to work it, they're familiar with it a little bit more so, but that first time was the focus for our particular project team initially. So we zoomed in on that, and we created some process SciPoc. So now let's get a little bit more detail. Again, 1 page, not too much detail. Zoomed in on that further, and now we can start attaching data to it. Now we can start looking at the different scenarios that take place, and then have the data about how fast is it, what's the quality rate, how much does it cost, so we can start analyzing those different scenarios. And then some of our scenarios in and of themselves were just crazy complex, so at times we would need to zoom one more level into a transaction level, and this might be, for example, looking at the city route. It's like, all right, for this one flavor of this one scenario, this is how we looked at it. So by tiering things in this category, at any point in time, we could always reconnect around a common frame of reference. So I'm delivering a recommendation. I'm saying the process XYZ, subsection 4, 298, and everybody's like, what are you talking about? Like, let me clarify. Let's go to our enterprise map. Remember that? Yep. Okay, zoom in on that. Remember that step? Yep. Okay, this is step 1 of that step, and we're going to blow that out. Yeah, and now everybody instantly knows where we're at. We have the same frame of reference, so we can communicate more effectively. And then it also made it so that none of our diagrams got to the point where they just look like piles of spaghetti, because then that's not helpful to anybody. So that's the mapping. Step 2 is the goal. The goal is where we say, how do we want this system to behave? A system is always designed to deliver exactly the results that it was designed for, right? And so the question is, well, what do you want it to do? And so let's not just hack randomly, let's be purpose-driven and intentional. Now, the game changer here is we discovered the order matters. So the first question before you go in and try to improve a process is to ask, is anybody still using it? And I am still to this day, not as often as I used to be, surprised to find out that somebody wants to automate some report or some form or some other thing, and I ask the question, well, who are you sending it to? And it's like, well, important people somewhere. And I was like, well, give me a name, just one, that's all I'm asking. And they're like, well, I send it to so-and-so at the department of such and such. And I was like, great, and have you talked to them ever? It's like, no, but we've been sending it faithfully for 14 years. And I was like, call them and ask them, do they even open it? And the answer is sometimes no. And so it's like, why are we going to speed up something that nobody wants? Right, we have way other amazing, wonderful things to do to spend our time on that. So relevance is first. Now, fortunately, most of our stuff is fairly relevant, so that doesn't happen as often as it used to. The next thing is to focus on speed. We say focus on faster first. Now, why would you focus on speed first? In many of the sessions, and I've heard it throughout today, I've heard we need government to be better and we need it to be cheaper. And to me, that is not what our customers want, as much as they want it to be faster. Now think about it for yourself for a second. If you're a claimant, you've been unemployed, what do you care most about in that moment? Would you rather A, have a check, even if it's wrong, but it's something, to get that sooner? B, to not have the check right away, but to feel confident that they're spending extra time to calculate it correctly? Or maybe they could deliver it and personally deliver it with a little gold plaque and say, look at the amazing level of service we're providing with it. Is that what they really do? They want that level of service? No. And are they really at that point in time saying, you know what? I wish my employer paid less than unemployment insurance taxes when I had that job. They're not thinking about I want this cheaper. They're saying I want it now, right? It's the ADD, our whole culture is that way now. It's instant now. Now that's not to say just throw garbage at them, but it's saying whatever we're doing now, if we could keep that same level of quality, because let's be honest, they're getting it now and it's not perfect now, so let's not stress. Let's just get it faster. Then they have a point of comparison and say, all right, I got something. Now I am not in uncertainty anymore. Now I can do something. Now I can navigate. Now I can at least complain. But if I don't get it, now I'm in the dark. So faster first, then better, right? Then deal with the defects. Then deal with the quality issues, right? It's like get it out the door, then get it better, and then look at selectively the features and enhancements that'll add the bells and whistles. And oftentimes they don't care. It's like if you got it to me fast and it's accurate enough, good enough. I'm moving on with my life. And then the amazing thing is if you do those things, if you spend less time having inventory stacked around and spend less time on the phone having people ask where's my stuff, spend less time reworking the things that are wrong, it is invariably going to be cheaper. Now the problem is most of us, especially in government, come at this with cheaper first. And we say, you know what, we're spending way too much money. Let's do some innovation to cut things. Well, you've instantly demotivated anybody who's going to want to help, because cut means my job's gone. Right, and so why would I want to help get rid of my job, right? So I'm gonna sandbag on that. And then also, if we cut cost, it's like giving a kindergartner a chainsaw and having them do open heart surgery. It's like, it sounds like fun, but somebody's gonna get hurt. So if you go cutting across, that 10%, you're gonna nick an artery, and you're gonna blow out quality somewhere, and then your timeline's gonna drag, and because your timeline's drag, your call's gonna shoot through the roof. Because your calls are shooting through the roof, you have less time to process, you have more defect, and then guess what? You're right back to it's more expensive again. So we say faster, better, cheaper, not cheaper, better, faster. A word on starting with better first. Why not there? Just deal with all the defects first. The challenge is that's a never-ending story, right? You can go down that rat hole forever. And so we've got to get to a point where we're delivering a responsible service, not a perfect service. And somebody's strategic goal called that out. Okay. So now I need some help from my team members here. So now we need to identify the bottleneck. So the folks in the front there, would you guys mind just stepping up here for a moment? And I'm going to go off mic. But I think I can do this. Yep. All right, excellent. So nothing to worry about.
Oh, wow.
All right, so if you guys can turn around and face the audience. There you go. Thank you, Kat. Awesome. All right, and I got to go back on the mic here now. All right. So what I'd like you to imagine is that, Janine, you are getting a picture of this, yes? Okay, good. I'd like you to imagine that this represents a business process. All right, and so, and every chain is like a business process. There are links in the chain, they all got to link together to be able to do a job. And this job, in this case, for a chain is measured in terms of its strength. All right, so we've got and now some people are saying, Lee, my organization's way more complicated. It's not this linear chain. And okay, let's say it's a chain mail. Let's say it's a big fabric, right? Still, in that case, if you grab any 2 points and you pull on it, one part of that chain will go taut first. And in project management, we call that a critical path. In process engineering, we call it the critical source. So same difference. There's always at least one path through that. So audience, question for you. Which link determines the maximum strength of this chain? Some are kind of tentative on it. If you're confident, say it boldly. Come on, we're change agents in here. What's the weakest link? Absolutely, it's the weak. Everybody knows that. Everybody knows it's the weakest link. All right. So what happens if, let's say, that I'm the executive over this amazing team, which is a pretty good-looking team, by the way, wouldn't you say? All right. So I'm blessed to have this amazing, awesome executive team, and every one of them is clamoring for more. What? What do you think they're all asking for? More resources, right? Give me money and I will change the world. Give me this and I'll make it better. Sharon knows what I'm talking about, right? You know, just give me a little bit more. Give it to me, all right? And they're going back and forth. Now, the mistake we might often make is like, well, we want to be fair. And in all fairness, I'm going to give a little bit to each one of them so that they all, you know, stop piping. Well, but what are the odds that that's going to hit the bottleneck? Almost none, almost none. So let's say that let's say Gail is great at advocating. She's like, hey, she's done a good job. She's got compromising photos of somebody, whatever it is, right? She has found a way to get the money, right? And so she's now applying these Lean Six Sigma great skills to this area and to make her links better, but her link isn't the weakest link, all right? So now think about that for a second. What happens to her links, the strength of her links, just in her area? If she invests that time, money, what happens to that strength? It gets stronger, right? And she's like, whoa, you asked me to improve government. I did. Thank you very much. Right? So she locally improved it, but what happened to the performance of the overall chain if she's not the weakest link? Nothing changed. Does everybody see that? Right? So the return on investment then is quite interesting, right? I got no benefit out of it, but I spent money on it. Right, so the total cost has gone up for no benefit. That's a negative return on investment, and you are literally worse off for having done that work than if you hadn't done it at all. Sorry, Gail, your heart was in the right place. I love you. All right, but thank you for playing. So where should we focus our improvements instead? On the weakest link. So take a look at this chain and let me know, where do you think that weak link is? Now notice where it is. It's between, right? I'm not saying it's Lori. I'm not saying it's Sharon, because that would get me immediately fired. Okay? Right? It's between them, and that's often where the bottlenecks are. The bottlenecks are often between the relationships. The bottlenecks are often between the parts, right? Now, we're not saying they are bottlenecks. We're saying the process is a bottleneck, right? So now if we spend the same amount of money that Gail previously got and we put it on just this one step, what will that do to the overall strength of the chain? It goes up. Excellent, right? Now we're getting a good positive return on investment. All right, let's thank our volunteers here. You guys can set that down right up here. It's the famous Rusty Lee chain prop. All right. So, all right, we got the idea. All right, Lee, I get it. I want to be laparoscopic. I want to be surgical. We need to go after that. Now, once you find that bottleneck, you need to resist the temptation. And the BPI team, you guys know this because you get big eyes. You're like, whoa, I can take this one on. We're like, easy, Tiger, easy. All right. Now we need to make sure that we're getting the most from it within the current policy, resource, and technology constraints. So don't have me go fight Congress if we haven't eaten what's already on our plate. And so what this looks like is make sure the resources that are between Sharon and Lori, they're not, on special assignment if they're a bottleneck resource, right? Don't siphon them off to something else. Don't put them on the social committee, right? Make sure that they're actually focused on doing that work. Make sure that the people doing that work are adequately trained and skilled. As you'll see, one of our success stories, we went out and hardworking people were doing the wrong thing very well. And so that wasn't helping anything. So we had to make sure we empowered them with the right knowledge so that they could perform effectively. And then, of course, if there's any unnecessary work being done at the bottleneck, and not that people are lazy or just playing Nintendo all day, it's about, are there tasks that are no longer as relevant because the customer is not adding value. Let's trim those out too to free up our focus on the tasks that remain. So then on step 5, then we look up and downstream and we say, okay, great, we're going to target that, but I'm going over here and I'm seeing Kathleen and I'm going, Kathleen, you're a workhorse, man. You are just pumping it out, right? And so she's producing 20 units a day, right? By the time it gets to Lori, she can only handle 10. Now, Kathleen's like, Lori, step up your game, man. What's wrong with you? Well, it's not necessarily Lori. Usually it's the system, right? Now, there may be other issues, but we can talk about that afterwards, right? But it's usually the system is designed to have some challenges, right, which is creating her bottleneck. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, Kathleen, right, if you can produce twice as much, we need you to take half of those resources, and free those up. Right, now, we're not going to steal them from you, right? We're going to free them up so that we can then allocate them maybe to an innovation team. People are saying, Lee, these great concepts, but how do I get the resources to have an innovation team? You free it up internally through the steps in the process that are overproducing, right? And now some might argue, Lori's like, I don't want her people analyzing my stuff. They haven't been doing it for 15 years. And I say, exactly. That's exactly what we want.
And I see it as a punishment because you're taking my good people away.
And in the moment, it certainly feels that way, right? Absolutely. But again, we're saying, hey, let's be sustainable. We're one vision, one team. We've got to do it for the whole. All right. So then we can take that, reinvest that on the bottleneck, and then we can attack the bottlenecks. And the bottlenecks in process go around policy, procedure, or practice. Policy is the actual law or rule. But usually these take on a life of their own in their own meaning, and then they get implemented in a procedure, which is how we want to do it or how we should do it. And then there's the practice of what people are actually doing, and those three often have nothing to do with each other. So when we start actually looking at busting those bottlenecks, we're looking at, okay, is the practice aligning with the procedure? Is the procedure, and what might happen often is, well, yes, the procedure is the law. No, the procedure is just how we do it. Right, the law is the law. Look, does the law say this? Well, but that's the way we've always done it. I said, I understand that. What does the law say? And oftentimes the procedures have these inherited parts that were relevant in 1960, when we were doing things a different way, and we're still doing today. So we need to find a way to kind of snip that. And only after we've cleaned up the process stuff should we be going after the technology, equipment, or begging for more resources. And heaven forbid, if all of those failed and you've truly optimized your processes end-to-end system and you're still not meeting service expectations, it's time to have conversation with legislatures to say perhaps we want to lower expectations and have different goals. And that's just part of making priority decisions. Okay, so for the last little portion here, I wanted to share with you a couple of examples of products and some solutions that this team has created. What is the method? Right, we map the system using just 2 process maps. So a SIPOC is really complicated. It's supplier, input, process, output, customer. All right, that's what SIPOC stands for. So it's a relatively simple model, 1-page thumbnail, and then a value, and that comes from Six Sigma. And then a value stream map is a lean tool, but basically it's a SIPOC on steroids. So it takes a particular transaction through a scenario and then puts some quantifiable data on it that we do from our site visits or from a sample. Right, so then we go do our data collection plan. Are we observing? Are we interviewing? Are we measuring? Are we doing studies? And then we look at the scenarios, create a Pareto chart, so we're choosing which ones to go after first. Then we incrementally write an issue paper to deliver recommendations. If it's approved, we go to an implementation paper to deploy it. And then, of course, any of those have the associated communication and organizational change artifacts, because most of the solutions are about making tiny changes in behavior. And then a performance dashboard so we can track our progress. So here's the EDD UI Enterprise SIPOC, which was proudly drafted by many people in this room, but principally Ms. Nezreen. So Nezreen, got to call you out on that. All right, so this is, supplier, input, process, output, customers. So, we have a few thousand people doing this every day, and what is it that they do in a nutshell? We'll claim it, submit stuff, we file their claims, we determine if they're eligible. If they don't like our decision, they can appeal it. If we're cool with it, we process it and we give them their money. All right, that's our process. Right, that's the process. It's really as simple as that. We add on a lot of other procedures to it to pull it off and to comply with stuff, but that's our SIPOC. So then moving beyond that, we said, okay, great. Well, there's many ways that customers can be served through this process. How do we get our arms around this? And so we start creating categories. And our first category is what we call the happy path or a clean claim. This is the fastest, simplest path with a desirable outcome. right? So usually what we do in process improvement, we start with the worst case scenario and we design for that, and then we wonder why it clogs up all the easy cases, right? We want to design it with the intention that says we want this to be easy for folks, so have that be your focus. Then the alternate path is, all right, now let's pick up where we start adding progressively more and more layers of complexity, but they still land well, and then we can start dealing with some of the exception paths. So it's like, okay, this has lots of complexity, and either they end in a defect or they're just late, which is a defect on the schedule side. Right, so we take them, we slice it, and there's a whole naming convention that goes along with that, and we lay those out in that Pareto chart that I mentioned to you. So there might be 10,000 of a particular thing at a point in time. In this case, the 0 case happens to be our happy path, which is most common. Woohoo, that's a good thing. That's not always the case. Whether the happy path is your most common or not, you always start with that, because when you're first doing this, you need something simple the team can kind of cut their teeth on. And the thing is if by making the simplest scenario faster, well, everything else triggers off of that. So if you can shave a day or two there, it tends to tighten up everything else, buys them more time to deal with the complex situations. And to figure this out, if you've got 1 million claims a year, how do you get this data? Well, you take a sample. And remarkably, if you take a sample of 100 out of 1 million, you get basically a plus or minus 10% variance at a 95% confidence interval. So doesn't need to be a lot of samples. If you're only doing 20, you're great. Look at 5 of them. So whatever it is, but take a sample and then collect that data. And then track your performance over time. Now, the dashboard that this team has put together has a combination of overall UI performance measures that the BPI team influences, but certainly they're not the only ones chipping away at it. There's other things going on in the department as well. We're not the only game. And then we also have things that are solution specific, and those are more our leading indicators that are more input measures. We can say, okay, do we have compliance with this? Do we have adoption of that? And so that's the dashboard. And Erica is currently our steward of that, so I got to call you out a little bit, Erica, there. All right, but I got to acknowledge, I think it was Julie and Najreen were having an excellent conversation around this, because this team, I got to give it to them, man. When I first started talking about this, when they're like, huh, what, math? Run away. And now they're having very intelligent, strategic conversations about the relationships between the numbers. And it's like, well, I noticed that went up to about 32%, but this other number went down based on our labor supply, what I think is actually going, and they're now diagnosing the system like the surgeons that they are. Right? We walk in and we're like, I'm sick. And somehow the doctor is able to figure out, oh, if I press here, does that hurt, does that hurt, does that hurt? Take a few tests, and we now have a course of treatment available for you. So this is a very instrumental part of the overall program. So let's walk through a couple of their scenarios. The process SIPOC for a clean claim, it goes through smoothly. And basically, they can do it online, mail it, or do it by phone. And let's look at it by the numbers. It's 20 to 30% of all of our claims go through. And when EDD gets a hold of these claims, they process them within a day. Right, so you hear some of the stuff in the news, and we all know that's how accurate those truths are. But I'm here to say that we turn it around. When the stuff comes in right, we don't fool around. We get it out the door, and we get it back to the claimants, and we get it fast. All right, so then it's like, well, why do things take so long? It's like, well, if you do something wrong in the process, or submit it wrong, or submit it late, or lie, well, then that complicates things for us. So cut us a little slack. So this is amazing, and most would be like, I'll take it, let's just move on, who cares? But no, we're always looking for, how do we get the best out of the clean claim? So interesting little facts, the throughput is measured in turnaround time, for online's less than a day, mail's 3 to 4 days, which is pretty good, but still takes a little longer, and the bottleneck for that is, go figure, the U.S. Postal Service. So the cost on these, the onlines are almost nothing when you look at it at scale, and the mail is pretty trivial. So this isn't really being driven so much by cost, and the inventory is pretty limited on both cases. So either way, this is good data. Like, we're happy with this. The question was, could we make it faster? Right? How can we take something that's fast and make it even faster? And so here's what our little investigative CSI folks came up with. They said, it's interesting. When people initially file, they do so online, about 79% of the time. And some of them can't for various reasons, but that's a great number. But somehow by the time they initially file their certification, which is how they get paid, we lose them. They start online and somehow they go offline. Now, this is not news to the department. We've known this to the department. It's not like this team discovered this, but we were curious and we wanted to look at it. And there's been megaphone approaches to find, hey, how can we communicate to the claimants to use online? And so we used our little 5Y technique. And we said, well, why is it that they're still doing it? They're not hearing all these major messages that are going out. And what we found out is the reason they switch from online to paper is because we tell them to. In micro messages, it's not the big loud messages, it's the day-to-day transactions. So you file online, it prints out and it says, okay, great, in a few weeks you're going to get this in the mail, return it by mail. If you have questions, call us. And they're like, okay, cool. And so they do what we tell them to. So what we've discovered is like, look, we need to shift that messaging so that when they file online, we say, great, when you get this, go online, right? Forget the stuff you get in the mail. We just have to do that because of some weird law, and we're going to get rid of that soon, all right? And so we've shifted the message, which has delivered now more than 63,000 free, using existing resources and technology, micro-marketed messages that are communicating to them in the transaction. Right? They don't have to go to our Facebook page to hear it. It's right there when they need it most. That will reduce the turnaround time by 2 days, and has contributed to going from a 20% to a 26% of online certifications, which adds up a lot when you're doing millions of them a year. So here's another one by a gentleman who's part of our virtual team. He's down in Southern California, Christian, and Nezreen was also working on this one. It's the wage overlap scenario, which is crazy complicated. I'm not even going to go into it, except to say the neat thing about this is that it was by popular request. The field was all up in our business saying, you guys have to take this one on. So we now have the field reps chiming in saying, hey, you guys are making stuff actually happen. Here, take this one on. See if Mikey will eat it. So they did, and they tore it up, and they looked at the quality rate, and they found that these really, at a high-performing center, they were doing the correct procedure 11% of the time. Right, that was not because they were lazy, not because they were being careless. They were working hard to do what they thought was the right thing because they didn't trust the procedure. Because the procedure, granted, the way it's written is kind of weird. It's the right thing to do, but it just doesn't read very well. And so they didn't trust it, and so they were doing what they thought were going to help the customer, but unbeknownst to them, because there's a relationship downstream, they were gumming up the work significantly somewhere else. So we came in and we said, well, how do we get from 11% using common practice to a higher percentage using the procedure? And so we communicated, there's education campaigns and training that are going on, and then we updated the manual, not just to say what to do, but why, and so that they could begin to understand those connections. So saved about 10 days to the claimant, 32% sooner, reduced 370,000 unnecessary work items a year that are essentially defects, and it's cheaper. We're looking to drop about $1 to $2 million back to the bottom line. So this stuff starts to add up, right? But again, our hunt was not to find money, our hunt was to make it faster. And so that's millions of days saved to our customers. One last scenario that I'll just kind of wrap on is our determination. So a big choke point in our whole process is you file, and then there's some issue, and we got to talk to you and figure out what's going on. That's basically what a determination is. And so there's a bunch of things going on in there, but our biggest bottleneck was right there in the middle, again, between the steps. So zooming in a little closer, the system schedules it, and 12 and a half days later, we're able to actually make the call. Now, some of that's because there needs to be certain time frames allowed for them to collect their stuff, but that's 5 days, it's 10 days, it varies, but it's like still our average is well past that, right? And not all of them need to be that long. So we asked why 5 times. And one of the things that we found was that the common practice was that people would prioritize first in, first out. So if I can do this scenario justice, Julie. So right now it comes in, first out based on the date. And the first one I do was due yesterday. The next one, notice it doesn't have that little star where it says FIPTL, which is first payment timeliness. So we're saying, all right, the next thing I'm going to do is one that's not due for another 7 days. All right, so I'm going to work on that one. So I was just working in chronological order. So what we're recommending is use the existing technology, no new technology, to flip a button so that it sorts based on first payment promptness. Because first payment promptnesses are due in 14 days, everything else has 21 days, basically. So the argument was, wait a minute, we're not being fair, and we just said, no, just prioritize within the day. Do all those that day. And so the results were, and again, delivered this by using existing technology, do some training, and we were able to reduce the turnaround time by about 1 to 3 days for that particular solution, increase first claim timeliness by 1.4%, and because we still had the time on the other ones, we just did it the very next day. So it's like we had all these near misses. We were missing it by a day. It's like, well, let's just reprioritize, get those under the window, and then land it. All right, so there's a few other scenarios that I had in case we had times for questions, but I mean, this team is getting to the point where we're finding, 5 million, 10 million, 800,000 type solutions that are out there, and it's getting pretty interesting. So just wanted to say thank you for checking out this case study here with my good friends at EDD. And as we all know, the waves of change are going to keep on coming. So you can either surf them or get pummeled by them. And we would invite you to grease up your surfboard and jump on the waves with us. Thank you.